Talking about this. This is the key question right now. For more, I am bringing in retired U.S. Army Major General Robert Scales joining us right now. He is in Washington, D.C. Sandra and Dagan in New York in the studio. General, thanks very much for joining us. And let me pose that question to you right now, because it is what everyone is asking. Are we seeing a shift in the conversation, a shift in policy from President Obama in terms of refugees and how many to take into the U.S. as a result of this terrorist attack here in Paris?
Absolutely not, Maria. The policy hasn't changed. The refugee policy hasn't changed. The military strategic policy hasn't changed. In a word, it's to do the same with flourish. The administration hopes that they'll be able to make it through the election without ISIS getting its act together and striking America. It's fine for the administration, not terribly fine for the American people. No, what Ben Rhodes said on Saturday, I think, is the American strategy, which is to press on by doing nothing, a pinprick air campaign, no real activity on the ground, and hope and pray that ISIS won't strike us before the election, Maria.
This is actually extraordinary, actually. Let me ask you what you see this, how you see this impacting the general election next year. We know that Secretary Hillary Clinton over the weekend, the Democratic debate, said that she is open to taking in 65,000 or higher refugees into the country, even though we really do not have a proper way of vetting the people coming into this country, do we?
That's exactly right. There is no data that's coming from Syria. And the other thing is, if we're going to take affected refugees from the region, why don't we take the Azeris and the Iraqi Christians and the Syrian Christians who've been brutalized horribly, not only by ISIS, but by their own countrymen, and they're sitting in refugee camps. Why don't we give those most damaged, least likely to be terrorists, first priority for coming to the country, rather than simply opening the door for Syrians of any stripe, 10,000 or so, to come to our shores with virtually no vetting, Maria.
That's right, because we don't have the information, because the Syrian government is all but collapsed. How are we supposed to confirm who anybody is coming to our shores? You know what, General, I want to ask you about NATO, so hold on for a moment. Let me bring in Dagan and Sandra in New York, because, ladies, it does appear that given this attack, this is a major blow to the president's narrative that ISIS is contained, that terrorism is on the run. How do you see this?
Well, is it a blow? Because the president, based on what he said on Friday morning, clearly believes that. And will this truly change his thinking and make us a great deal more aggressive at addressing this fight, not only over there, but right here at home? If you watch that Democratic presidential debate on Saturday night, which I know most people in this building did, you had Hillary Clinton and Bernie Sanders refusing to use the terms radical Islamic terrorist or radical Islam. They chose to say jihadist, violent extremist, but they are, until, and this is to Bob Scales, until you acknowledge your enemy and know your enemy, can you fight that enemy?
Go ahead, Bob Scales.
Yeah, absolutely right. I mean, there simply is no military strategy. If you're going to be effective with air power, which seems to be the strategy, you have to have an air campaign. That's hundreds of strikes a day. You have to give up the rules of engagement, which essentially say you can't fly a mission if a single civilian life is threatened. You can't have an air campaign like that. We have to start building a coalition of Arab states and NATO states to go in on the ground and capture Mosul and take out Raqqa. Until we remove the centers of gravity of this insurgency, ISIS will continue to grow and eventually strike in our own country.
Well, I think it's really important to point out that the French government was so fast in terms of its response, immediately going and hitting some very key targets in Syria, ISIS targets like recruitment centers. They knew exactly where they were. I've got to ask you this because, Bob, we've been trying to figure this out all morning because the French coordinated with the U.S. in terms of hitting those recruitment centers, those ISIS targets. If we knew exactly where they were and we knew exactly what to hit, in Syria. Why did we need to see another attack in France in order to hit these? I mean, the president has been saying he wants to defeat and disable ISIS, and yet we waited for another attack, more people dead, in order to actually hit those targets. Why?
Easy answer.
If we knew where they were.
It's called rules of engagement. The command is so constricted, so tied by the rules of engagement, by the fear of accidentally killing civilians, that many of the targets that the French hit were targets that we wouldn't hit simply because of the rules of engagement, and also by the pace of the operations. Remember, the United States is delivering an average of eight sorties a day, 75% of whom don't drop their bombs. That is not an air campaign. Those are pinpricks. It's done purely for style, not for substance. And until we're able to increase the tempo, then nothing will change.
Robert, what does this mean for NATO? Tell us how NATO gets involved here.
Well, NATO has to get involved because NATO's been intact, but it won't happen through Article 5. The only way to make this work is for the United States to lead and establish a NATO coalition with the affected Arab states and begin to attack what we in the military call the centers of gravity of the enemy. That is, their two capitals, Mosul in Iraq and Raqqa in Syria, to threaten these centers of gravity directly, surround them, take them down. And when that happens, Maria, ISIS goes from being a military threat to simply a police threat. ISIS is on the run, and this whole thing is over. But it's going to be a while before we get our act together to do that, Maria.
And it certainly is going to involve a real change of strategy than the current thinking from President Obama. Bob Scales, thank you very much. Thank you for weighing in.